5 minutes. All right, we're gonna move into some quick updates. So Don.
All right. Yep. So I'm going to start. I'm going to cover the financial update. I think Justin is going to give a legislative update. And then Nick, should we have time, has a few FMP, HCP updates there. So it's 12:45. I do want to make sure that I respect everyone's time given the end of a 2-day meeting here. So I do want to ensure that we get to close out there at 1:45. So some quick financial updates. I'll provide a high-level overview, maybe starting with the agency as a whole. Ultimately, a significant fire season last year, over $320 million spent by the department. The state of Oregon does not set aside any money prior to a fire season to pay for fire season. The strategy the state uses is that after the fact, the department should go to the emergency board and request reimbursement. That model did not work this last year because there is not enough money in the emergency board allocation to do that. So hence with that, we were not able to pay our vendors, firefighters, et cetera, after this last fire season. There just wasn't enough money in the state system to allocate it. The legislature then needed to hold a special session. They did that in December, and they allocated enough money for us to pay those vendors for their work last fire season. But no more. So with that, as an agency, we're heading towards the end of the biennium here in June 30th, and we still don't have any money. We're projecting a $4 million balance as an agency starting July 1, heading into another fire season. So ultimately, there are, and Justin will speak to a bill in the legislature looking to try to change that strategy for the state on how we pay for fire seasons. But as a whole, the agency has put out direction or austerity measures to limit travel, to limit large expenditures, to defer if possible. So continue to have that financial struggle as an agency as a whole. More specifically in the state forest, then significant challenges financially there as well. And it came up a little yesterday. Barrett mentioned the current model as being a dead end. So the division produces revenue projections. We project forward when revenues that we receive, when those come in, expenditures, et cetera. And that is on a downward trajectory for our forest development fund. Essentially, our savings account will be empty within the next biennium or the next 2 years. A number of different variables when we project like revenue. For one, as we talked about, nearly all of it is timber sale revenue, right? 97.5% of the revenue we receive is from timber sales. One of those metrics may be the total volume that we expect that we have sold, right? But so we know that we recently adopted the next 2 years of implementation plan, so IPs with a total harvest level of about 185 million feet. So that total harvest level at a reduced rate. When we sell sales, what we get for that total volume is heavily based on what was the purchase price, right? So what prices are we receiving? And then in addition, we actually don't receive dollars until purchasers decide to harvest. So that piece is also somewhat outside of our control, not all, because we put some provisions in contracts. But a lot of, based on these projections, where we stand as a division is determined at how much wood is moving, what was the dollar figure we received when that sale was sold, let's say 2 years ago. And we've seen a kind of record low volume moved over the last year or so. I do think purchasers chose to harvest in many cases on their own properties prior to some new restrictions going in with the PFA. But hence for us, that would mean that revenue still exists. We just haven't seen it yet because it hasn't been harvested. So that's on the revenue side. Again, some of the variables in there. I mean, once it's sold, we know the dollar figure, we know the total cost, what we will receive. We just don't know the when. On the expenditures side, ultimately costs of government, costs of services, whether that's contracted, personnel costs just continue to rise at, in my mind, an unsustainable level. So what we saw in our fire protection budgets this last year is a 10% increase for the same service. That 10% we saw last year and that 10% we saw the year before. And then inherently for like a public landowner, there's other structural items that in my mind are inequitable. So now for state forest land that, let's say we looked at yesterday, Dan, what's the dollar per acre that state forest? So
$5.12.
$5.12 per acre state forest.
That's parcel we just drove by that was down there. They're paying $1.97.
Yeah. So a public landowner pays $5.12 and receives the same level of service that a private landowner, industry or non, gets for $1.97.
Contributes to the complete and coordinated effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know that we do like get the same service. We actually do the service for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're paying for the same engines to be on our ground versus their ground, et cetera.
Yeah.
So
this is fire service?
So that's one piece, the cost to pay for protection of the forest land, and that dollar figure comes out of the FDF or the state forest portion. So at a high level, projected to run out of dollars in state forest division within the next 2 years. Structurally, so the strategy then is to buy us some more time with what can we do in the short term? What about midterm and what's a long-term solution? Ultimately, when I look at the base structure of how this works, it's untenable. And when I think about, for one, that sole revenue source being timber, distributing 2/3 of the revenue to the counties. Then we pay out of our portion the bill for fire protection, which is now $3.5 million. We also pay for what's called administrative prorate, but so like overhead for maybe our ODF HR and our payroll staff. But we also pay, the majority of that is called DAS service charges, so Department of Administrative Services. And so we're paying for staff, let's say, at the legislative downtown, to do facilities work there. So $6.5 million for DAS service charges annually, $3.5 million for the fire protection portion. So there's a $10 million overhead, let's say, before you account for our staff to do the work. And so inherently we're structurally, we cannot make enough reductions in the division in where we have sphere of influence on, the staff and the services and supplies, to change that trajectory. We may be able to push it out a little bit, but we can't change it. So hence needing a longer term strategy, which needs to include some fund source. So in the short term, we are, so when I think about revenues, expenditures, short term, and this is with a past conversation around SFAC, around annual operations plans. Did we meet our volume target? Did we sell all the sales within the AOP? We do have direction that our primaries will move forward and be sold as part of that primary sale lineup, regardless of if we've met our volume target. So, I don't know, Amanda and Laura and others, I think that was a conversation that we had when we were in Forest Grove last year around maybe not, again, pushing sales forward, because in our mind, we've already met our volume target. But for purchasers and operators, that was a job that you said you were going to provide and you didn't. So hence, we are going to keep those assigned to that AOP. On the expenditure side of things, our budget instructions, essentially we're deferring investments in the forest where we can. We are holding positions vacant where we can. Essentially, whatever we can do under that short term, buy us more time and defer, we're doing. And so what that means for us this year, working with the district foresters and the REI unit and the Tillamook Forest Center, I believe we're running at about 15 positions that we're holding vacant. I know of 4 up here in Astoria, and you kind of do that across the board. We're holding 3 vacant in Tillamook. We're holding 2 positions vacant at South Fork, in addition to a 3rd Tillamook Forest Center REI org structure. It's essentially across the board there. We also paused on paying for future replacement of our fleet. And we'll look to downsize our fleet to the tune this year of $1 million by not a one-time deferring of, hey, this is where we would save for a new vehicle this year, just like you would in your personal finances. I can't afford a new vehicle. I don't have the dollars to save it. We're going to defer that cost. So with that, again, though, with holding about 15 positions vacant, deferring the costs of our future vehicle fleet, our costs compared to last year remained flat. And just so essentially, as we shift here into midterm, we're going to look at right-sizing the organization. As I think about those 15 positions and then some additional positions in the State Forest Division in our Salem headquarters, I could see us holding 20 positions vacant. There's about 200 positions in the division, so a 10% reduction in the size of the organization.
John, can I interject just brief? I have to, well, it's burning in my mind. I canceled other people to stop using the term right size. It's the wrong size. You're wrong sizing the staffing. I mean, you're forced to. Right sizing implies maybe this is something right about it.
Wasn't the term daunting?
No,
I'm just saying,
and it was to get away from the term downsize, which supposedly had a negative.
That's,
We could say reduction in force.
that's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
something other than right.
Right.
And I've told Mike that too, so. So that's, sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And so with that, again, I do not see us able to do much more than that and actually get our work done. Actually, as we end this biennium, we will get our work done right by the finish line. And now we will be entering another fire season with less staff, et cetera. We have been talking about, as a state forest leadership group, around what this means for our commitment to fire season. Can we participate like we once did? What are the implications on our workload, backlog of work given fire? And is there a way for us to potentially, while we have a set harvest level and a set total harvest, is there a way for us to begin to get further ahead on the next year's harvest to bring in additional potential volume and revenue that could get moved to help bridge this gap? But I'm hard pressed to ask the staff that I need you to do more work, and I'm asking you to, with less people, we're holding this many positions
What
vacant.
happens if you increase harvest now, then because of the plan, you won't have it later?
It's really not increasing harvest, it's pushing it forward.
Pushing it forward.
It's
Okay.
trying to bring some revenue that we would receive years into the future.
Right.
As
But
early
if
as
you
we
won't
can to
receive
buy
it
us.
into the future.
Well,
Yeah,
most of
but-
our sales have a 50% payment or 40% payment on it anyway. And if we don't get a sale out the door now, they're gonna lose this operating season to do road work. So it's all gonna happen next June, no matter what. I'm not gonna be horsewhipping staff to get a sale out in October.
And again, just within the constraints of the side rules, how can we, what strategies could bring in more revenue? What can we control on expenditures, et cetera?
I
Kind
have
of-
a question.
Yeah,
When you talked about not having enough to pay for fire protection, and the people you contracted with last year had to wait until the legislature provided money, will those people be somewhere else? Will it be harder to get those contractors, those fire contractors, if we have fires?
I think we damaged our reputation, and it's,
Amanda's comment.
Oh.
Great job. Yes.
Well, and it wasn't just fire vendors. They paused all state forest vendors as well. We're gonna see an increase in costs due to late payments. 2 to 3 month late payments. And they go, wow, I'm gonna tack on 10% to any of my ODF bids just to make up for that.
and what's challenging about that is, on the fire side of our business, we have relationships with these local contractors, just like in state forest we do with our purchasers. And there was just not money in the state government system to pay them. It wasn't a ODF or your finances, or you don't have the capacity, or you just didn't have the money allocated. So it strained our relationships when it was outside of our control. And then hence, in addition, some of those articles portrayed it as an ODF issue, which is unfortunate because that's not the case. We went through those fire bills, and at one point could have hit the red dump button on $80 million of payments, but it wasn't in there. So hoping to get some movement on that in this session. Midterm, we are working to look at seeing if we can fix some of those structural issues, which ones are within our sphere of influence or control. So, Kate, for one, this is a priority for her. I do not think we've ever been able to elevate State Forest Division financial viability as a top state forester priority, but with her leadership, we are now doing that. So we are meeting with the other divisions to look at some of those inequities around this division's participation in the fire program, but yet not the associated funding to go with it. We are looking at how those admin costs are allocated across the agency. In some ways, we pay our share, and then through our fire bill, we pay a portion of the fire division's admin prorate too. We are looking at other options as part of that FFR and Good Neighbor Authority to potentially look at some shared funding for our positions, see if we could diversify a little bit that way. We are going to take a true kind of business lens look at our REI program as a whole. And that it does include meeting with parks. They're doing the same thing across all of the programs that they deliver across the state, and kind of a cost benefit analysis around what is the demand for that location, what does it cost them to run that location, and which locations are therefore their most popular or least used locations. And if they had to divest, they would be informed enough to do that. We're going to take that same sort of look as well, looking for opportunities to increase revenue generation at the Tillamook Force Center. And Joe's got some thoughts there. And I think as we do that work should come to this committee for their thoughts and input. Working to diversify kind of the customers for the South Fork Force Camp. A unique operation jointly run by two state agencies for 75 years. I get comments of why do we do that work, and that's not tied to our core business. I also think should the agency not be able to fund that operation and want to walk away? My assumption is the governor would say, no, thanks. Fall in line, ODF, you will, provide this as a state executive branch government, you will participate in this. And so as I think about that, those are some of the midterms. Long-term, ultimately, it's going to take some sort of solution involving the governor's office, legislative fiscal office with the counties.
Dylan, I might premise a little this. The system has been incentivized to protect the general fund through the legislature. And with state forests making revenue, whether it's forest resources or protection, they get to use that money, and then it's offset. It offsets general fund obligation, which could be used other places. We've got to be somehow turning that conversation to a place we can run our own stack for $26 million a year. And that's about what we can generate from 185 feet. We can't pay for the extra fire costs. We can't pay for the admin costs. And then we're paying $3.8 million in harvest tax through reduced stumpage. Yet we do our own forest practices inspections. So through history and development, the state forest program, everything's been incentivized to pull money out of there. We need to turn that around and make it so it's a closed system.
Yeah, I agree. And so those are some of those structural pieces that have always existed. They don't seem equitable, but they have always been there. And then now as we move forward, ultimately, we need to find a champion in the legislature and also come up with a strategy on what would we bring to the legislature to invest in. And I don't believe the past practice, we have not been successful with saying REI or public benefits for public services or South Fork, hey, we're reducing the recidivism and we're helping these folks, give them new job skills to integrate back into communities. We have not got any traction on any of those. So in my mind, thinking through what is that strategy, as we essentially can get some traction from this state forest division. We're getting a little bit on the fire side of the house, but never been able to do it on the state forest
I
side.
haven't had that conversation with Betsy. The fear was decoupled. That you would decouple the revenue from the harvest and then de-incentivize harvest through the system and then have an appropriations model like Forest Service. That was the fear. If we can maintain a coupled conversation, we're paying for our own staff and for providing for the interests of the trust counties, and then have the legislature pay for the administrative overhead costs of Salem fire program and keep it coupled. I think we'd have a better conversation. You know, if we're South Fork, providing a greater good, but should timber dollars pay for inmates? That's really a DOC function.
Yeah, and there is a bill in the legislature this session intended to provide that certainty around our harvest levels, right? And whether that moves this year or not, I don't know. But if something like that existed in statute that provide those assurances that we would continue to harvest our forests, would we get support to then, like you said, get other funding for some of these other aspects of our business that through GPV we are required to provide? So yeah, those are the types of things of, what is that strategy to be successful? So I think, of course, I'm going long already.
I just want to ask you a question about DAS. What is it that they do for you? And you have to pay them?
That's a good question.
I mean,
Enterprise network, they provide high level,
Well, directly they do a payroll. We do a lot of payroll staff.
they do payroll.
But then, then you have DAS CHRO, which is the overarching
Human
HR
resources.
agency that
HR,
oversees
okay.
CBA negotiations,
Union bargaining.
DAS risk management.
So there is some value.
There is, but it's a giant black sucking hole that money flows into.
It happens our counties have the same issues, you pay for Columbia County, you pay for the commissioners, finance, HR, council, and you might not use them, you think you use them, but you do. It makes the county run, it makes the state run.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but we do need a champion in the legislature, and that's a tough one to come by right now.
And I do think it starts with the state forester, and we now have traction there on this topic, which is great. And then ultimately the next step is a champion there in the legislature. We did highlight the state forest financial challenges at our Ways and Means presentation as an agency this last year. It's my understanding that the board members are all well informed and they understand this. But there needs to be a sense of urgency and a strategy developed around this. Sure.
On the REI side, I tried to get random projects for the mountain bike community a couple of years ago, and we did some surveying and found folks were willing to pay $40 to $60 a year for a pass. I was trying to get them on a statewide program. Anyway, now everyone, Hood River County's got their own parking fees and so on. So they're willing to pay. That's complicated now because you're going to start that conversation now at a time when you told them, no, we're not doing anything for you. Because, of the austerity and the optics of the expansion. But that'll take probably a public process or a field track, the Recreation Advisory Committee process to socialize that.
There's a delicate dance there, and Nick probably knows this better than anyone, but there's fractured trust with the GOP side of the aisle with the HCP. and being able to tease out what Don just talked about government costs ever increasing separate from a policy choice. And getting them to yes, application general fund. It's gonna be tricky.
I mean, this isn't like anywhere close to any of that, but that HB 3103 that you were talking about, that would set a sustainable harvest level. Like we engaged with them throughout the development of that thing. It's sort of in the spirit of like, we need to make sure we have good relations with people, even when we don't agree on the legislation they're trying to pass. I don't know that it bought us much capital, political capital, but it's like, that's where we're at these days, is just re-engage and yeah.
The other just snippets I wanted to add were with the State Forest Trust of Oregon. I chair the board of trustees for that organization, and we are trying to raise money, donors, foundations, corporations to support RAI. And the department invests not much, 50 grand a year to support the trust operations. If that goes away, we're not going to be able to apply for grants and foundation and donor support. So that's the knife edge you're kind of on, whether to cut off your ability to pursue money. Those are tough decisions. And then finally on the OHV funds, I've been lazy. I haven't banged this on issue, but I encourage folks. It's not OPRD money, and it's not lottery money. It's not tax money. It's OHV users money. So we've OHV, and all that money comes from users. So they bring out $1 million into state forests every year. So we pay about $100, $120 a year to be there. And most staff, I think, don't know that. Most staff think that timber dollars build recreation staging areas for OHV, and I still hear that reflected that we've been paying for that stuff for a long time. So when I hear people say, thank you, OPRD, for the grant money, I always used to correct Liz and Ron and say, no, thank the OHV community for their money.
Yeah, thanks, Mary.
Well, sorry for the personal story.
No, that's all right. I mean, if you can pay to play.
Absolutely.
Things that are driving me crazy are those gross demonstrable inequities. Why are we paying somebody else to turn around and do our own FBA administration? It's like up to the tune of 7 figures. So in my mind, we have to like fix all those things within our span of control to have the conversation with the legislature eventually that says, look, we're doing everything we can. And if you value these services, we need some other financial solution. Yeah.
I think one of the hardest parts of the conversation is things like that. It doesn't matter whether you agree with other forest management plan decisions that have been made. Some of those inequities are inequities no matter what program we're in. And so it's fixing some of those underlying things. It's difficult if you do disagree with the forest management plan decisions to not help the discussion, but they are separate issues. And so, and it's hard as we're communicating with folks that may have a disagreement on that, to separate the issues. But I think it's in our best interest to do everything we can to do so. Otherwise, we're just not going to be able to move forward.
I think a lot of folks in the legislature just don't even think about us because they don't have to, because we pay for ourselves, right? There are others who are aware of that, but they're not going down.
And they don't have to because there's not a constituency. There's no political pressure to think about it.
Yeah, right, exactly. And there's others who are like, I'm aware of that problem, but we have other problems in front, and they pay for themselves. Mike, I should say, now that we're talking, like, not, to spark, but Mike did go before, Mike and Kate went before Ways and Means last month, I believe. And presented our financials, so we are like getting it on the legislature's radar. But he said to them as well, as somebody else, I think it was FTLAC, that in his mind, I'll say in his mind, because I can't corroborate these numbers. We would have to cut 285 million feet a year, every year, and assume costs never increase again in order for us to pencil out with the current revenue distribution formula. And one, we know costs aren't going to be fixed. So 285 is unrealistic from his perspective long term. And two, his perspective was that we couldn't maintain a social license in Harvest at 285, or we would get sued trying, and then possibly get enjoined and never get another stick. So that's, he said that to Ways and Means. He said it in other groups. So we're starting to sort of use that talking point to make the case that, because the point there is like, with or without the HCP, the numbers are still going here, and it's hard to see how we could ever sustain it.
Yeah, but and then I had a chat about that. Maybe predicating that those government costs are going to continue to grow and we're going to continue to pay them. Extract that out. It becomes a slightly different car. And then that's going to be the challenging part. How do you tease out those?
And even personnel was part of his point was just our costs of employees increases always. So even if you zero out the other ones, just salaries alone make that number goes up. It stays, it goes flat, and it goes down. So it's somewhat, his point being, it's somewhat intractable if the only tool in the bag is a chainsaw. You know, it's like we've tried, it hasn't worked, and when we try and go high, we get sued. Yeah,
I said the same thing down there. Part of Waste Means.
Yes.
And the look I got was, I recognized the expression. They knew I was right. I mean,
it can be true.
but it's like, yeah, but we're not going to do anything, or we don't. Why would we make us do something? It's basically the look I was getting. It's like,
Right, like, well, we can't cut any timber and these aren't seeing the benefits. Like,
So I do want to save time on the agenda for Justin and others as well. And again, we kind of waited to have this on the afternoon part, just to not, paint the entire day really.
Ruin our day.
So some significant challenges, and we'll keep them updated.
Hey, Justin, do you want to take us through the legislative updates?
Sure. Okay, so good afternoon. Again, I'm Justin Buttress, Policy Analyst in the State Forest Division. Just going to try to run through this pretty quick, and happy to dive deeper into anything else that you might all be tracking or interested in. But first, to start with some summary stats. This session, over 3,300 bills were introduced. As an agency, we tracked about 1,029 of those for some sort of impact or the possibility of an impact on an amendment or something like that. About 40 of those 1,029 were expected to have major impacts to one or more of our business lines, while another 62, so about 10% total, were expected to have minor impacts. So about 10% of the total having some sort of impact to us. In state forests specifically, we tracked 104. Of those 104, 13 were expected to have some sort of major impact to state forests, and another 23 were expected to have some sort of minor impact to us. By this point in the session, most of those bills have died in committee, which is exactly what happens every session. Thousands are introduced, and hundreds might actually get hearings and pass and become law. So we're actually nearing the end of session. Sine die is toward the end of next month. So we are almost at the deadline for the second chamber. It's the 23rd, so a week from today. Bills will have to have been scheduled for a work session held by the 23rd in the second chamber, or they will die in committee, with the exception of certain bills. So if they're in revenue, ways and means, some joint committees, those bills aren't subject to these deadlines, but the policy bills that are in policy committees are. This week we saw the revenue forecast was updated. That just happened on Wednesday, and that revenue forecast is used by the legislature to inform their final budget decisions. So they're going to have to put together all the final budget bills for all of the agencies and other things here. So they need to know, what kind of money they have to spend. The revenue forecast, specifically the general fund and lottery portions of that forecast, were reduced compared to the previous forecast. And the state economist has indicated that there's a higher probability of a recession in the future. So those signals in the economy are expected to have a chilling effect on many of those bills that are sitting in Ways and Means, waiting for appropriations. So we'll see where that all goes, but expect generally there's less money to go around, so expect a lot of those bills to just not be priorities and not get funded. So to get into specific bills for state forests, we're down to two that we would consider sort of our high priority bills. Don mentioned one of those earlier just a few moments ago. So House Bill 3103, that's that harvest level rulemaking that he made reference to. That one had a hearing held on March 3rd and a work session on March 31st, and passed out of committee and is sitting in Ways and Means because it does require an appropriation to be a fully funded mandate anyway. So we'll see where that one goes. Sitting there, as I said, in Ways and Means. Senate Bill 179 is another high priority bill for us. It's recreational immunity. So it's seeking to respond to some of the challenges that there's been to the recreational immunity law in the past couple of years. So that one passed out of the Senate, or passed the Senate completely, and passed out of committee on the House side earlier this week, so just on Wednesday. So that should then go before the House floor. I think it's scheduled for a third reading early next week, Monday or Tuesday. So in that third reading is when they get a vote on the House floor. So expect that one will probably pass, and that'll help to shore up recreational immunity a bit and improve things for landowners that are providing recreation opportunities for Oregonians, including us. The last one to note, probably on the more impactful side, though this isn't really a high impact bill, is the tribal engagement bill, House Bill 2069. It creates a task force on tribal engagement. So that one passed out of committee to Ways and Means earlier in March as well, and really just requires state agencies to cooperate with that task force. So minor impact, but as state forests and the Department of Forestry are seeking to have more robust government to government relationships with Oregon's recognized tribes, we want to keep a close eye on that one and make sure that we know what's going on there and have the opportunity to continue to do better there on that front. Last time we met, I mentioned several high impact bills that I was bold enough to read the tea leaves on and suggest that they had a low likelihood of moving. And I was right. So go me. So without going through all of those, basically all of those ones that I mentioned last time, like the the reconveyance bills, the ones focused on the HCP, cell tower leasing and class up in Tillamook counties, all of those just died in committee. One interesting thing to note, though, on one of those bills, House Bill 3846, it didn't pass. It got a hearing. This is the one that would have the Department of Forestry authorized to enter into a lease of at least 15 years for the Ochoco National Forest to take over management of that national forest. It got a hearing, and something probably along the lines of a courtesy hearing, but it really spurred a lot of good conversation there. And since then, it gave us an opportunity to speak with the representative who was championing that bill about good neighbor authority and how maybe that sort of thing could be expanded, and opportunities could be found to use good neighbor authority to accomplish some of the management activities on the Ochoco that we're finding on other national forest lands under that authority. So really good, positive progress, I would say, on that, and communication and focusing on existing tools that are in the toolbox rather than, a legislative bill to have us take over management of that forest. So we'll see. It's a good thing. More conversation to come on that probably. Moving into lower priority bills. We had a bunch of bills on administrative rules. Those are largely sitting in the Rules Committee, which is exempt from the policy deadlines. So those are still out there. One worth noting is House Bill 3569. This one requires the chief sponsor of a bill that causes rulemaking to be invited to sit on the agency's Rules Advisory Committee to have that advisory committee for the rules in support of that bill. So that just passed the House Wednesday and is now on its way over to the Senate Rules Committee. So it's Senate Rules is exempt from those deadlines, so that one can continue to be out there until the end of session. So we'll see where that one goes. So just kind of interesting to have to invite the legislature to participate in those racks, but doesn't really ultimately have a big impact to us. House Bill 2977 increases the transient lodging tax, and we pay the transient lodging tax out of the net campground. Out of the gross campground receipts. So we pay that tax, and then we distribute the remainder where there's a statewide transient lodging tax on all of our campgrounds, and then some counties have a county transient lodging tax as well. So that had a hearing last week on the 8th, and had a hearing all the way back in February and a work session in March. So it seems like they're kind of maybe having some sort of motion on this every month or so. Since it was just up for a hearing last week, it might still be kind of limping along, and we'll see where it goes. It doesn't have universal support. There's some interest in having the transient lodging tax fund other things other than tourism, which was the intent of that transient lodging tax originally. Yeah. So that one, we'll see what its fate is at the end of the day, but it's not just as simple as we want to raise taxes, and then you have people who don't like new taxes, and you have people who like services. It's raising the tax and then using that money for different things too. So other bills of note that maybe don't have any impact on us, but are really interesting and worth noting changes for the law and that sort of thing. House Bill 2558 modifies the definition of a charter guide. That one's sitting in Ways and Means. We do have folks that get permits to operate as charter guides on state forest lands, so I always want to keep a close eye on those sorts of changes. House Bill 2232 transferred I say transferred because this one's actually already been passed into law, signed by the governor. So transferred some of the OHV standards that previously ODOT and I think DEQ had to OPRD. So that one's passed. Forget the effective date. I think it's January 1.
Immediately.
Oh, that one's effective on passage. Okay, thanks, Barrett. I should have known. Rather than making a guess, I should have just said, Barrett, what's the effective date? So emergency clause effective on passage. So that's good. So that one is law right now. And the last one worth noting, and bring this one up because there was some conversation just a little while ago about funding and maybe OPRD could be a funding source and this sort of thing. So Senate Bill 565. This one originally would have required OPRD to study state campgrounds within 25 miles of the coast. And then they introduced a -1 amendment to look specifically at the OPRD funding model. So as I mentioned earlier, the revenue forecast for lottery is going down. And even without that going down, parks and their funding model, they're looking at effectively not being financially solvent in the next biennium. So the 27-29 biennium, I mean. So we're looking at this one, we're tracking it. This bill, if it passes, would require a study be done into that business model, and they're a self-funded agency off of their campground fees, and then subsidized with lottery. Sounds a lot like our business model. We get a little bit of campground fees, and then we generate the rest of the revenue ourselves from non-recreation. So looking at that recreation model, that's of interest for us. And then of course we get some transfers from them as well, and we want to see where that's all going. So so that one is let's see, had a hearing last month or back in March actually, and work sessions on 327 and 41. They adopted their -2 amendment, and it's sitting in Ways and Means now. So it does contain that study portion in that bill. And it also transferred the Capitol Grounds, which was a state park. And OPRD was responsible for the maintenance and cleanup and everything there. It transferred that back to DAS. So DAS is going to be taking over that piece of property for maintenance and on all of that, and no longer will be a sort of financial liability for OPRD. Other agency bills of note, just to highlight a couple. So Senate Bill 494 was a study for DAS to look at classification and compensation of forestry workers. That one is in Ways and Means, has a couple $100,000 fiscal associated with it. So not real high, but does require some money, and we'll see where that one goes in Ways and Means. But it's something that we've signaled it would be really good and important for us as an agency. So hopefully that gets some funding. House Bill 2817 just changes the way forest closures work under the fire program under ORS 477. That one's already been signed by the governor. That was one of our agency bills. Our other agency bill, House Bill 2819, was around citation authority that allow our fire wardens to issue citations, even if they didn't see the person like sort of directly doing something. So if they see somebody with an illegal campfire, they can still write them a ticket, even if they didn't see them put match on Tinder and start the campfire. But if they're sitting around it, that's sufficient. So that one's passed out of the House, had some work sessions this week, and has another one scheduled for next week on the 19th. So hopefully that one gets going. Senate Bill 1051 transfers appointment of the state forester to the governor from the Board of Forestry. Not Forestry's bill. We don't have anything to do with it. Just to be very clear. But that one had a hearing on the 24th and really nothing else going on it, though I would say it's still very much alive. But again, not a forestry bill, it's a governor's bill. And then, as was mentioned also earlier by Don, House Bill 3940 is the wildfire funding bill. That one had a hearing on 5/1. There's still ongoing conversations going around how to fund that, where the funding should come from. Sounds like it's not the bottle bill, despite that sort of being the original proposal maybe in there. But so details still being hammered out. Expect that bill to move in some way, shape, or form. The last one I'll mention is Senate Bill 83. That's to repeal the hazard map, the wildfire hazard map. Seems like that's a universally reviled body of work, and with bipartisan support to repeal. So passed out of the Senate earlier on a 29-0 vote. Had a hearing on 5/6, and there's a work session scheduled for the 20th over on the House side to finish that one off. So expect that'll pass and repeal that. So with that,
What do you have
I
got on to be
will-
unanimous about something?
Yeah. So with that, happy to answer any questions. I know we're also running kind of toward the end of the day here, so.
All right, Justin, we just had a big plate of pizza.
Yeah.
Struck me though, when you were talking about the transient lodging tax, which I know goes to tourism, but how much of like money that we come in that we then pay in taxes winds up in the kicker fund at the end? It's like, I'm not asking, it's not a question, it's rhetorical, but it's just, and I don't just mean our agency, it's like, how much are all these agencies paying each other? And then it winds up in the kicker or gone, it's like, what is this monster? Sorry. Yes. I just had pizza, so.
It's a
The angry Sicilian, yeah.
There was a question about what's the implications of 3103? Like what happens if it passes? And what happens to the HCP if 3103 passes? Was that the question? Yeah.
So 3103 does specifically say, that, and it's the intention of the people who are really promoting this and lobbying for it to not undermine the HCP. But the bill does say specifically, like taking into account the requirements of the HCP, find the available land base on which you can manage, and then calculate a sustainable harvest level. So the intention is for it to really hold the HCP harmless, not get in the way of having that as a programmatic, way of complying with federal law. And then it also, says that we've got obviously discretion to follow other state and federal laws in the way that the state forester feels is appropriate. So it's really intended to have us decide where our available land base is, the acres that are available for harvest, and then make that calculation based on that, and then accomplish the harvest that is modeled for those areas, or be sued.
That last part being the key, because of course we already do model 10-year harvest volumes and then meet or exceed them for the last 20 years. So,
Yeah. I didn't spend any time today kind of going through that bill. I did last time with this group. But what I said last time is, the bill in concept is fine. In theory, it's great. It has some technical issues that give us pause and heartburn, and it's going to lead to expensive litigation. Bottom line.
Anything else? All right, thanks, Justin.
Yeah, of course.
Right. We're at 1:45. when I do.
What do you think, Nick?
Oh, they've both been great.
I mean, so do we want to maybe take 5 minutes and then close the group out? Is
Yeah.
that long enough time or?
Yeah, it's more than enough. I can probably do it quicker. So on the FMP kind of next steps, I mean, the FMP itself, we've sort of slowed. We're not working on it right now. I'm supposed to go back in and look through all the comments to date and figure out what changes we are going to make and then circle back with everybody. So we kind of just been sitting on the document itself while the board considers these modeling scenarios that are going to them in June. So, we have the HCP that informed that production landscape, and then the board and FTLAC had some discussions and came up with these 4 different model runs reflecting 4 different kinds of harvest or approaches to harvest. So like a long rotation run, a net present value run. So those are kind of polar opposites. And then a run that the counties sort of said we'd like this harvest level for the first 30 years. And then one that kind of reflects how we manage the forest today, which is sort of maximizing volume over time. So those are going to the board in June with a whole bunch of outcomes. That's going to help them have a discussion with FTLAC. We have 4 hours scheduled to just kind of talk it out. What is it that they want to see for that production landscape? It's not, let's pick one of these scenarios. It's probably going to be more like, yeah, we would like to see even flow. I'm making one up. Even flow at the district level over 30 years at this approximate harvest, and then do that. They're going to give us a series of like, these are the things we'd like you to achieve. We're going to model that, come back in September with that information, and to the extent that any of those performance metrics can be extracted from the modeling data or associated data, we're going to bring all those performance measures too. So it's like, here's how that scenario you asked us to do performs on all these different metrics. And then I don't know what we do. And then from there, they are going to basically clarify what would it take, like sort of what is the process by which they would approve the set of performance measures. What are the components? Are these the measures? Are these the metrics? Are these the targets, et cetera? And then when we come back in September with those information, the board will refine the targets and trends and thresholds for the performance measures. So the notion here is they're going to give us some marching orders for what they want that part of the forest to look like. We're going to model it out and show them what we think those outcomes look like. They may say, go forth and do those things, but set these thresholds and targets for us to evaluate your performance over time or over the first IP. CMP. HCP, I don't know. We're, as of today, we're still on schedule for take permit issuance, sort of second quarter, let's call it, of next year. That could change based on whatever happens with the RIF that's supposed to be coming to all federal agencies. So we're kind of waiting with bated breath to see what happens there. End of report.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for, I think, 2 great days. Thanks again for the tour. Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. And we'll see you all in October.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We all the fires are up. We're still in the air.
Fingers crossed.